Hi everyone, my name is Tyler Reed from the Scholastic Communications team. Welcome to our mini PD session today, focused on best practices in instructional leadership for principals. We're glad you came out to watch. You'll see on your screen we have a spot here to pose some questions to our panelists, so I hope throughout this discussion you'll feel free to type in some questions and we'll take those perhaps throughout, but definitely some of them at the end of the session. I want to pass the reins here over to Sue Gendron, who is going to serve as our moderator today. She's the president of the International Center for Leadership in Education, and she's also the former president of the Council for Chief State School Officers and the former commissioner of education in the state of Maine. So she is one of the country's leading thought leaders on leadership in school districts. So, Sue.
Thank you, Tyler, and welcome everybody. It's indeed a pleasure to join you tonight around your living rooms to have a conversation with two of our dynamic instructional leaders that we've had the pleasure of working with. At the International Center, we have focused on partnering with school systems to help develop instructional leaders. We've been at this for over 20 years. Bill Daggett is our founder. And we wanted to bring Sue and Sharon to you this evening. And I'm going to pause here before I give you a little bit more background because I'd like Sue to introduce herself and then Sharon to introduce yourself and give a little background about who you are and where you've worked. Sue?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I am Sue Szachowicz, and I am now a senior fellow with the International Center for Leadership in Education. But prior to that, and really for my whole life, I am a Brockton, Massachusetts educator. I was born and raised in Brockton, went through the Brockton Public Schools, came back to teach in the Brockton Public Schools at Brockton High School, and then became an administrator in the Brockton, at Brockton High School, and then finished my last 10 years as the principal of Brockton High School, and I retired last year. And it's been a pleasure to not only, of course, work at Brockton, but now work with various leaders across the country, and the partnership we've had with the International Center has been just awesome. And before Sharon introduces herself, I would say perhaps one of my greatest pleasures as an administrator in Brockton and specifically as principal was hiring the best. And with Sharon Wolder, she's the best. And she came to student teach at Brockton High School 20 years ago, and we never let her go. So with that little bit of an introduction, I'll let Sharon speak for herself.
Hi, everybody. And again, I'm Sharon Wolder. I am the current principal of Brockton High School. I just started my second year in the position, although 1 year as a principal, as those of you who are principals know, it's like 7 years of something else. It is constantly busy. There's always something to do. There's always an event to attend. So even though I've completed 1 full year, I don't feel like I'm new at it anymore. I learned a lot in 1 year that we'll share some of that with you tonight. But I have been at Brockton High School for 20 years, student teaching. I'm from Iowa originally, went to do my student teaching and never left because there was something very special about the school and about the people there that convinced me to stay, and it's been the best career move I could have made. So my education experience working in education has been at Brockton High School in a variety of positions, and now as principal I have the joy of leading some of the change and some of the things that have happened within the school and maintaining the consistency of the things that we've already been doing well.
Thank you, Sharon, and thank you, Sue. And, as we had some preparation for tonight, we know that principals across the country are feeling incredible pressures. You are being asked to implement higher standards. You're being asked under state, federal accountability systems to have your students perform at much higher levels. And we know it's really important that our students have to be able to achieve at these levels, the careers, the jobs that they're going to pursue demand higher literacy, higher math skills, and they also require our students to be interdependent, independent, creative, problem solvers. And so as you're working to achieve these new expectations, getting ready for the next generation assessments, building capacity of your teachers, responding to new teacher evaluation systems, we know that successful schools like Brockton High School, it requires a certain level of instructional leadership. And tonight, what I'm hoping that Sue, and I know Sue and Sharon are going to share with you, what are those critical components that must be in place to ensure that your schools can, in fact, achieve at the highest levels. So I'm going to ask Sue and Sharon to briefly describe what are those key components that you felt were critical to ensure the success that Brockton has achieved over the last 13, 14 years. So let's start with you.
Sure, and you know, when I listen to you list all those mandates and pressures that are on schools, well, I think it just keeps getting more and more intense. And the best way for me to answer that is really to talk through the eyes of what happened in Brockton. When many, many years ago, Massachusetts passed an ed reform law back in 1993, and that brought in a level of accountability that, Sue, we had never seen. I mean, I'm old, and as a teacher for so many years, I could do whatever I wanted in the classroom. And frankly, as long as I wasn't tossing kids out of class, that was okay. And suddenly in schools, we were faced with a high-stakes exam, and in Massachusetts, it's called MCAS, and it's extremely rigorous, and as it should be. And in Brockton, we had a 75% failure rate. And I always tell the story that one of my most painful days ever as a Brockton educator was when we ended up on the front page of the Boston Globe as one of the worst performing schools. It was titled Failing Schools. And when you see that, and remember I even went there, that hurt. And so when you ask what needs to happen, I flash back to those days, and what we had to do is really take control of what we were doing and what we were asking kids to do, but most importantly, what we were doing as adults. And the real part of the success is for that as an instructional leader is that it really is about the adults. I believe kids are kids everywhere, and they will do whatever the adults insist that they do and help them do. And so I really summarize what we did in 4 steps. And the first one is it started with a team. So I think a good instructional leader knows you can't be one of these crazy Lone Ranger types that says, I am a change agent, follow me, and we will, and change the school. It took a team of people to roll up their sleeves and work hard. The second step was we had to figure what to focus on. We were all over the place. There was no focus at Brockton High School. There were new initiatives. There were we had a new administrator. It was off. We were running on to something else. So we focused, and we looked at our data, and we asked ourselves, what do our kids need to know and be able to do to be successful on the test, to be successful in their classes, and in their lives beyond school? And that led us to our focus on literacy. The third step was we implemented our literacy initiative with a plan. We didn't leave it to chance. We taught ourselves how to teach literacy skills to the kids, and we all did it. Since when is literacy just in the English department? It was across the school: reading, writing, speaking, and reasoning. And then where I think many schools falter is how do you monitor a school-wide initiative to make sure it happens? And we monitored it like crazy by looking at and comparing student work and looking at the standards across the school. So I think those 4 steps for us: empowering a team, focusing on literacy, implementing with a plan, and monitoring like crazy, were really the heart and soul of how we sort of took control of our own future, really, where we were going as a school.
Great, thank you,
And
Sue.
I'll add to that, Sue, because I think one of the key things, and you heard Sue say it, and I have to keep saying school-wide, 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 because I've talked to a number of people, and they've had literacy initiatives that were the English department did it, or the English and social science department did it. It was not every teacher, every guidance counselor, every person who was responsible for the education of children doing it. And so I think when we say school-wide, people really need to get that message. Oftentimes people are surprised that our guidance counselors do literacy lessons. And so that focus of we trained ourselves on how to do specific things and then figured out how does it connect to whatever it is that you teach in a way that makes it authentic and useful for the students. And then that monitoring piece was, you roll it out with a calendar so everyone can practice, you can look at student work, you can figure out what changes need to be made, you can provide each other with support and have the discussions about what it is that we want our students to be able to do and helping the adults work through it. And a lot of that was connected to the scripting that we do. And when I share the scripts that we use and how detailed they are down to the second that people spend doing specific things, people are surprised that it is that detailed, but it's because it's that detailed that someone who has never taught how to teach writing or never had to do the kinds of grading and lessons that our teachers are doing, that they were able to confidently go into the classes, feel supported, and actually do it. That started years ago, and we just kept building on it, and it's what we continue to do. So every initiative that comes now, we have a format for introducing it to our faculty, and we don't have to worry about trying to get buy-in because they're used to doing things school-wide together moving forward. And it has been very successful even with all the new initiatives, the change in standards, all of those things. To have people work together, look at things together, and plan together has been very beneficial for us.
So Sharon and Sue, I think that's a critical piece. So often now what we hear across the country, how do we build capacity of teachers? How do they understand the shifts that college career standards are requiring in the classroom? You began this work at Brockton well before we were having these conversations nationwide. And you've learned a lot about what you're data-driven. You looked at that to determine where you needed to focus. Can you talk a little bit more about how that professional learning takes place? Who creates it? Sharon, you just talked about scripting it. I think principals could really learn from your model because you didn't add more time. You solved it in very different ways. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Sure. We could not add more time. We would love to add more time for things, but it just doesn't work that way. But what we did do is realize that we could use the time that we had differently. And instead of just the general meetings where you can give somebody some information in an email, we said this is very valuable time. It's our only time to work together, so how will we use it? And the scripting part of it came because we started with writing, and we've done a number of other literacy workshops since then. But knowing that it was a level of skill that people not everyone has had to use in their instruction, we had to make sure that you start by teaching a teacher the skill that you want the students to learn. And in order to do that and do it consistently and across the board, we have a very large school, and so there's 300 faculty members, and so you have about 30 people delivering this message to different groups of people, and the only way to ensure that everyone was getting the same message, the same level of support, was to make sure that it was scripted out. So at this point, we were very clear. This is what you say to the teachers. This is what you have them do. And then the first one, we actually scripted it out so that the teachers could then go into their classes and feel like, okay, I've learned this process, but now I need to know exactly what to say to my students. And so we provided them with that script as well. Here's what you say to the students. Here's what you have them do. And we got better with scripting over time. And we realized the importance of making sure within that 45 minutes we had with them, how much we could accomplish if we did it consistently and together. And so we stick with that process, and people expect it. They don't want us to come in and say, oh, we're just going to have a meeting and people get to talk about what they want. They want it to be when they go back into their office suites or engage with other faculty members, they can have a conversation that's the same conversation because they've experienced similar things, and they can plan together that way.
So you keep talking about we. Who's the we?
Good question. That would be what we call our restructuring committee, but here's what that means really. That's that empowered team. It's really a think tank. And at Brockton High, as principal, and I think Sharon would echo the same, I couldn't have worked without that group. It's a balance of usually 2/3 teachers and 1/3 administrators. And we meet together, and it's not just a committee of people yapping. It's really hard work, and we focus on something and we figure it out. And so that team became the group that became really the power group in the school of figuring out, here's what we need to do and here's how we're going to do it. We trained ourselves. We were a real example long before it was sort of fashionable to be training the trainers, so to speak. We taught ourselves how to do this. Sometimes we had missteps. We weren't always good at it. But I think what we figured out is not everybody knows how to do something. And like I always joke when I'm presenting, I talk about how as a history teacher, no one ever taught me how to teach the kids reading. If I gave them something difficult to read and they said, this is hard, I would answer that by saying, I'd teach reading by saying, read it again. What we figured out in Brockton is, like Sharon described, if you teach the teachers the steps to then teach the kids and then have them practice it, deliberate practice again and again, the kids start to learn it. And so that restructuring committee has been the heart and soul of the change process at Brockton High. And we came together as a team, we argued, we had some good fights, we laugh a lot, we eat well, but it really is about two goals only. That, you know, this restructuring committee adopted two goals 15 years ago and we haven't wavered from them. Goal number one is improving student academic achievement. And goal number two is personalizing the educational experience for every kid, because we have over 4,000 kids at the school. And you know what? You never really reach those goals, do you? So you have to work at them all the time.
So we're starting to get a lot of questions and from folks who are listening. So I want to try to embed them in. And one of the first questions, and Sue, you talk about this. So how do you handle the resistors who really, you are implementing this work, wanted no part of it?
Are there such people like that in education, really? Oh, I'm telling you, Sue, I think it's the most, one of the most difficult aspects of instructional leadership, and I would say this very honestly. I went through a very traditional principal preparation program, you know, at a university, all that stuff. I was never prepared for how to take on the resistance. First of all, I was shocked by it at first, because I was sort of a compliant little doobie. If I was told by the principal to do something, I would have done it, even if I didn't like it. It's like, well, after all, they're the principal. So it was something that we had to learn. And taking on the resistance, I would sort of go at this in two ways. There's one part of resistance that's not about opposition. It's about caution. And I would say teachers that have been in the business a long time, that have lived through a lot of change and a lot of initiatives, sort of see it as, I'm not sure I'm going to buy in. I don't know that this is going to work. And is this just another thing? And you know what? I can understand that, because I've lived through a million initiatives. For that group, I think the way you handle it is by teaching them how. Let's do this. You make the case. This is what we're going to do as a school. You use the data to say, here's why we're doing this. We're going to do literacy. We're doing it because the kids on the MCAS are failing, and you say in your classes that they're not reading the material well. And so focusing on reading and writing like this is going to help the kids. And then you implement with a reasonable plan so that they see that this is something that fits. Sharon mentioned this. Their subject area was always the context. But I will say very honestly, that's still not going to get buy-in. What gets buy-in is when you get results. The second group of resistors are the ones I was not prepared for. The first group is you like persuasion. It's like, this is going to make sense. Okay, they'll do it. The other group is the over my dead body, as Bill Daggett always says it. And we had more than our share of the over my dead body crowd. And you still, I think always, I try to deal with things with humor and convincing and a positive nature. But at a certain point, it becomes mandatory. We all will do this. Here's when you're going to do this. You've been trained how. I'll support you. I used to offer my services co-teaching with them. They didn't always choose to accept that, but I wanted to make sure they got support. But sometimes it is because I said so, and we're going to do this. And sometimes you have to have what we refer to, it's a great book by Susan Scott, it's called Fierce Conversations. And sometimes you have to have those fierce conversations. But you have to stay the course. You can't let a group out, like Sharon said, we all do it. And as soon as you start excluding groups, it weakens the initiative. So we felt strongly about that. And we had plenty of resistance.
So you had non-negotiables, and you supported those. And Sharon, you mentioned that you actually shifted the focus of what had been traditional faculty meetings. Those were all about professional learning. And another critical part, one of the other questions was, professional development is crucial. How did you carve the time out of the day? Because you didn't necessarily carve it out of the day, you actually were in classrooms supporting teachers. Can you talk a little bit more about that aspect of your plan, where you were supporting, monitoring, coaching, all through that plan? Sharon, you want to answer that one?
Sure, and I can tell you, especially with new teachers, because what we started doing years ago and have had to continue to do, because people always ask us, well, how do you continue with the type of progress, the sustainability of things? And that really is about, people retire, people move on, and when you get new teachers in, you have to then take them back 13 years and bring them all the way through all of the things that we've accomplished, so that when they walk into the classroom, they're competent to do the types of literacy lessons that we want done and that we expect done. And so we run it kind of like a university, actually. We schedule time within their day to have them go through a literacy training, and then we help them figure out, how do you put this in a lesson plan? Because it looks good, but where does it fit? How do you make it work in your lesson plans? And then they come back with samples of student work, and they analyze the student work. And we have 2 instructional resource specialists along with department heads who are then able to go into their classrooms and support them as they do that level of work. Our instructional resource specialists can do similar to what Sue was talking about. They can go in and co-teach with them, or they can model it for them and have them watch them teach, or they're the people who are going to lead them through the instruction part of things. And so they serve a multiple role in the lives of our new teachers, but they also work with some struggling veteran teachers where you might see some mediocrity, or they've done something for so long. And I'll give you a real example. With our actively reading a prompt, there's a 4-step process, and some people did the first 2 steps and they forgot about the 3rd and 4th step, and so it watered down the process. And so when they started seeing the rephrase the question and then come up with your plan for answering the question, they acted like it was brand new to them. And so this is where all of the faculty went back through the training, and then we could target certain people where we weren't seeing it being done, and target them not in a negative way but in a supportive way. What are some things that within your department you're working on, so that the department head can say, now how are you going to make sure that they, break this prompt down with using all 4 steps instead of 2, and then you look at the student work and have conversations. The nice thing was it led to some conversations about how rigorous the prompt was. So ultimately, with people being able to look back at work and not feel in any way threatened or this is part of my evaluation, especially when they're learning something, it really allows them to do a level of analysis that they wouldn't do if they felt that, you know, this is going to be in my evaluation and held against me if I'm actually self-critical. And so we have worked really hard to make sure that people are able to work together, that they have the support, and knowing that we couldn't add time in our day, it really was start using the time that you have differently. People have administrative duty time that we can pull them from and give them additional supports. They have a planning period that somebody can offer them supports. And then the 2 faculty meetings a month, we said we really have to make the use of every moment of this time in a way that people walk away feeling like they're getting professional development, even though we don't have hours and hours to get it done.
So every principal has been feeling external pressures to the higher standards, and we have a question from George. And Sharon, you just talked about you've been at this for 15 years, 30 years developing key literacy strategies. You're coaching your teachers all the time. So how do you handle those external pressures when the standards changed in Massachusetts? Then Common Core was adopted. Are they helpful? Are they a hindrance? How do you have those conversations when you have those external pressures?
Well, I would jump in and say...
Go ahead, Sue.
Okay. The external pressures are always going to be there. And as principals, I think it's up to us to really sort of try to take control over them and focus. A line I frequently say to people is, figure out what you can control. And don't worry so much about what you can't control. Because you know what? We really do have more control, I think, than we think we do sometimes. And so by helping, and this is where the team comes in, the Restructuring Committee, or whatever, you know, you can call it a leadership team or a transformation team. But when something new comes, and it seems like it always does, we lay it on the table and say, all right, how does this impact us? And how do we take control of that and make it our own so that we're not always, you know, dancing to the newest song that comes out? How do we control it so it's best for us? And that's where the Restructuring Committee has been huge in sort of helping us take ownership. And Sharon, I think, you know, you're still going ahead with that. You faced even more mandates this past year.
And I would say, to add to that, when Common Core came, people thought, oh my gosh, we have to do something away from our literacy. And what we did was we sat the standards down next to what we already do. And we let people analyze, what are we doing that's already there? And what are we missing? And so then we can target the what are we missing rather than looking at this entire document and assuming, oh my gosh, we're not doing any of it. And that calmed people down quite a bit, because it was, here are the documents. Now let's take a look at, we have some things in practice that our students have been very successful with. What is it that we're already doing? And then where do we need to go from here? And it was amazing how it just kind of calmed everyone down, because it did give them a chance as teams, interdisciplinary teams, and then within department, to really look at what the standards were asking and to really be reflective about what their current practices were. And so then people could identify, well, we don't do this, but I can see where it fits, rather than somebody just saying, here's a mandate, here's a mandate, here's a mandate. And that goes back to Sue saying, how do you control it? How do you own it? You own it by allowing people who have to actually go into the classrooms and make the thing happen. You own it by giving them time to really look at it, have conversations about it, and figure out what they need to do with it. And then you provide them with the right supports to get it done. We have had, between the new ed-eval system, the accreditation that we're going through, Common Core, whether we're shifting to a new testing system or not, we've had a number of things happen just in my first year as principal. but I would not allow people to lose the focus on literacy for students. And so those things are going to come and go. We're going to get through those things. But ultimately, what makes it possible for us to get through it is our students' academic performance and us staying focused on that.
And really what the two of you have just articulated, you always have had a systemic look. And I think the other differentiator here, when you look at the standards, those are the outcomes, not the instructional practices. Even though we talk about those instructional shifts, I think that's the critical piece that both of you model for principals across the country. You really help teachers to know those outcomes, and you model, you reinforce, you monitor like crazy. But not only do the kids know what's a good instructional practice, your students implement it on a daily basis and apply that skill, which is a real credit. I do want to ask one more key question, and please, if you have questions, send them to us. We know that, Sue, you've been leading the school for 10 plus years as principal, and you were also a critical member of the first Restructuring Committee. And Sharon, you now have to walk in Sue's amazing shoes. And consistency is key, but you also have to be your own leader. So what has it been like to make that transition, and what advice do you have for principals who are thinking about making that shift or building sustainability in their schools around leadership?
Well, I always say I wear my own shoes.
And she has big feet.
Yes, I do. But to that point, I think anybody who steps into the position of a principal, someone was there before you. And so, you know, I heard in the beginning, well, Sue used to do it this way, or you're not like, or what can we expect from you? They're always going to look to make those comparisons. And so when you step into the job, you have to know it's coming. And so you have to be strong in who you are and why you took the job, what you think you can bring to the table, and how you plan to get it done. I think one of the things people wanted to feel confident in is knowing that the things that we do that work were not going to be taken away. And what helped was I was part of developing the things that we do that work. And so it wasn't a matter of an outsider in this particular case going in and saying, now I have my own vision of what this school should be. It was continuing the things that we know work well for our students and preparing people for the future that we have to get our kids ready for. And so to be able to walk in and say, here's what we know that's working and consistent. Here are the changes that are on the horizon, and continuing to empower people so that they know I have an idea, I have a way of supporting, and it's respected, I think is key. And if you're walking into a situation where the school is different and you haven't been there, you have to kind of get to know what is going on and figure out how to respect people. But you also have to go in with a message and let people know exactly who you are and make sure you have your own big shoes.
Great. We have two questions I want to make sure we get to. So George wants us to ask you to respond to. You've monitored and proper implementation are critical, and in-class support. They'd like to know, what models have you found to be most effective? Walkthroughs, informal evaluations, formal evaluations, instructional rounds. What would you recommend?
Good question. I think we have tried all of the above. And for us, I think people have to come up with what works best for them, because I think culture in a school is huge. The walkthroughs when the literacy initiatives are going on are huge, because you get a chance to see it in action. You get a chance to see the students doing it, which is terrific. But what has been most effective of all for us is the follow-up, where we collect and review and compare student work, where teachers sit and after we've done a literacy workshop and it's been implemented, a writing lesson or so forth, and we bring the teachers together with the student work, and we take them through a protocol of questions, take a look at this work for the standard, for the question prompt, what is it asking. That really made us look hard at what our own standards across the school were. So I think if you haven't done something with reviewing and collecting and reviewing student work together as a faculty, that is something that would be well worth trying.
Okay. And Tim has a question for us. Tim's from a small school where he's the only administrator. How would you suggest that he find the time in the teacher's day so that they can teach and help with the committee concept that you're proposing?
Well, our committee met on Saturdays, so that's one way. I mean, I never found time after school to be particularly productive because everybody was so frazzled. So we met on Saturday. We still do. Well, I mean, Sharon's leading it now, but still Saturday mornings because it brings people together. Everybody knows in advance, and it brings people together in a thoughtful, focused way. But I guess I'd say this too. I think you look at the time. I mean, everybody's schedule is different in a school, and even whether it's big school or small school. I guess I'd always ask this question. Look at the time that you do have and ask, is there anything else I can do with that time in a different way? We were always looking to grab time. How can I use the time I do have maybe a little bit differently? Like somebody covering someone else's class for a short amount of time. You know, sometimes 20 minutes can get a big bang for your buck.
So I'm sure Tim would like to know, so how often, was it one Saturday a month? Did you pay the teachers to come? So one Saturday a month, and teachers were paid a stipend to come in on that Saturday. So you had to budget.
Correct.
How did you budget for that?
Well, Massachusetts is a strongly unionized state, and Brockton has a very strict union contract. So we didn't have any flex in that. If we do something like that, it's mandated that it be paid on the hourly rate as prescribed by contract. Now, our superintendent supported it by using regular curriculum dollars. There were no grants, there were no extra funds. He put aside a part of our regular per pupil curriculum dollars and said, principals need to apply for these for something that would improve student academic achievement. And so we apply and fund our restructuring committee through that funding. It's not a lot of money, but.
And the last question is, so you mentioned Massachusetts is a strong union state. So how did you bring the union leadership in your school and district on board to support this work?
Good question, and and Sharon is still doing it now. When we first started down this road, I at the time had just stepped into the associate principal's shoes and immediately started meeting with the union president because we didn't want an adversarial situation. I mean, there are certain times things become adversarial. There may be circumstances over which you don't have, that it's a whole different ballgame. But student academic success, we are on the same page on that. And so we always shared every literacy initiative with them. We invited the union leadership in for our literacy workshops. Sometimes they came, and we always welcomed them to do any of the walkthroughs and look. And one last thing I'd add, and Sharon alluded to this earlier, when we were doing the monitoring, we actually did not do formal personnel evaluations when someone was learning something. We said to the union, we won't do a formal evaluation. We want to see how it's going, but we won't use it for personnel purposes when they're first learning it. Once everybody's learned it and is doing it, it's a different story, but that sort of toned everybody's nervousness down. But the union was a partner with us in all of it. Hey, they look better too. They want to see students doing better.
Well, Sharon and
I
Sue,
think the other piece you want to add to,
go ahead, Sharon.
the other piece you want to add to that is we were very respectful of the contract, and
Correct.
And so it was important for us to, and the people who sit on the restructuring committee, with the exception of the principal, they're union members, and so it really is about making sure that people don't feel that you're trying to step around or violate their rights or as union members. It was really respecting the contract, but saying we can add rigor and we can hold people to a higher standard, and we can do this together. And I think that was the other piece of it. No one felt like their time was, they didn't have extra meetings. There was nothing there that said we are stepping outside of what the contract says we can do. We are working within that contract and working with all of you.
Well, Sharon and Sue, thank you so much. You are inspirational leaders. I'm sure that those who are in our hangout tonight have learned a lot, and I would like to invite you all. In February, the International Center for Leadership and Education will be hosting a Principal Academy in Nashville, and Sue and Sharon are going to be key presenters there. You can learn more about the Principal Academy at the International Center for Leadership and Education's website, and we encourage you to bring a team. As they mentioned, it takes a team. It's about distributing leadership, building capacity, changing the culture in our schools so that we all focus on what are the critical changes that need to happen. And so thank you for joining us tonight. Tyler, do you have any final wrap-ups for us?
I would just encourage people to keep an eye on our Google Plus page. We do these mini PD hangouts, some of them for teachers, some of them for principals, some of them for superintendents, about every month or so. So keep an eye out for many more of these to come. And if you have any feedback, let us have it. There should be some comment section on the event page, so we'd love to hear from you. Thanks. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you.
Great job.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, George, for your feedback. We have a great thank you. Thank you for energizing the discussion. And ladies, that's a credit to you all, both. Thanks.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.